That woman, Estelle, is partly the reason why George Sharp and I are separated today. Dirty crepe de chine wrapper, hotel bar, Wilmington Railroad, 9:45 a.m., August, Monday morning. In the basement museum of the Inyo County Courthouse in Independence, California, sign pinned to a mandarin coat. This mandarin coat was often worn by Mrs. Minnie S. Brooks when giving lectures on her teapot collection. Redhead, getting out of car in front of Beverly Wilshire Hotel. Chinchilla stole. Vuitton bags with tags reading Mrs. Lou Fox, Hotel Sahara, Vegas. So, what's new in the whiskey business? Joan Didion's essay on keeping a notebook, which is in her collection of essays Slouching Towards Bethlehem and was written in 1966, explores the reasons and significance behind the habit of keeping a notebook, and it remains one of my favorite essays to this day. I discovered it as an undergraduate when I was doing my first degree in writing. And here are 10 main takeaways from that essay that I'd like to share with you. There's so much conversation and so many how-to videos on keeping a notebook and keeping a journal and keeping a planner. And many of them focus on how those systems or how those notebooks are organized or decorated. And when I think of keeping a notebook or a planner or a journal, I always refer back to Joan Didion, who only died a few years ago, and she will remain forever one of my favorite writers. But her focus in her essay had nothing at all to do with what her notebooks looked like or how her notes were organized, even though after she died, her remaining unused notebooks were sold for an exorbitant price. I think each lot went for something like $11,000 at auction for 12 blank notebooks in each lot or something like that. But she never talked about how her notebooks were organized or how, she went about writing in them. She focused in her essay on why, the reason why she kept a notebook, what that impulse or compulsion was, what drove her to do it, some of the things that she wrote in the notebook, and an analysis of why she would jot down such things. So some of the takeaways, and I'll just make a quick list for you. She talked about personal memory and identity. Personal memory and identity. So she emphasized how a notebook serves as a repository of personal memories and experience, and they help us to construct and to affirm our own identity. She also talked about selective memory. I mean, we don't ever remember everything that happens to us. We remember certain things that happen to us, certain things we highlight. And so she discusses how notebooks capture selective memories, often emphasizing details that resonate with the writer's own emotions or thoughts at that particular moment. She also talked about disjointed entries. Joan Didion was a masterful writer. She was a social critic, a political an analyst, and she was an absolutely brilliant writer of memoir. And yet, and she was a journalist, and many of the entries in her notebooks are completely disjointed. She acknowledges that notebook entries can be disjointed and fragmented, and they reflect on the writer's emotions and also the writer's internal thought processes and unique perspective on different ideas. She also talked about self-reflection. So she talked about how keeping a notebook is an exercise in self-reflection, and it allows the writer to explore and understand their thoughts, feelings, and their reactions. She wrote publicly as a career. That is what she was. Both her and her husband were writers, and that's how they made a living. But she talks about this kind of writing as a private act. She views notebook writing as a deeply personal and private act, which is not intended for others to read. And that frees you to be like really candid and really honest. Also talked about our perception of reality. So she talks about how the way that things are recorded in a notebook can shape our perception of reality, which may not actually be reality at all. It's a blending of factual occurrences along with subjective interpretations. I can very much relate to this point that she makes, that notebooks are often or can often contain emotional anchors, notes that capture the essence of an experience or a feeling that might otherwise be lost over time. So I've jotted tons of things down in my notebooks that I'm quite sure at this stage in my life I would never remember if they were not written down. And creative inspiration is another thing that she talks about in this essay. She notes that notebooks can serve as a source of creative inspiration, providing raw material for future writing projects. And, I know many of us or many of you are not professional writers and have no intention of writing publicly. But for those who do write publicly or have some other creative outlet, these things that you write down, the notes that you write down, can actually be used for inspiration, be it for painting or knitting or writing. They can be inspiring. She talks about the preservation of moments. So the act of writing in a notebook, again, preserves moments that would otherwise be fleeting or insignificant, but for some reason, because you chose to write them down, they hold personal meaning for you. And then keeping a notebook is also a connection to the past. If we revisit our old notebook entries, we often find connections to our former selves, and that can offer us insight into how much we've changed over time, how much we've remained the same over time. So I absolutely highly recommend this entire anthology of essays. This collection of essays, Slouching Towards Bethlehem, is one of the most beautifully written books I've ever read. I love Joan Didion's writing style, And this essay I have read so many times. I've highlighted it in different colors. I've put brackets around things. It is a brilliantly written essay that resonates a lot with me. I'm going to read this one passage to you that I return to a lot. You can find it on page 139 if you're looking at the book. It all comes back. Perhaps it is difficult to see the value in having oneself back in that kind of mood, but I do see it. I think we are well advised to keep on nodding terms with the people we used to be, whether we find them attractive company or not. Otherwise, they turn up unannounced and surprise us, come hammering on the mind's door at 4 a.m. of a bad night, and demand to know who deserted them, who betrayed them, who is going to make amends. We forget all too soon the things we thought we could never forget. We forget the loves and the betrayals alike, forget what we whispered and what we screamed, forget who we were. I have already lost touch with a couple of people I used to be. So I will leave you with that. Happy writing.